The Snyder Cut is coming, and everyone who ever fought for it are rejoicing. Among those who fought for it are obviously fans, but also the Snyders themselves, the cast of the movie, and many others within the industry. Let's just say that the social media campaign to release the Snyder Cut didn't coordinate a push at the most critical of dates last November all on its own. But for all the goodwill the Snyder Cut announcement may have bought AT&T, both among fans and within some parts of the industry, there are others that strongly disagree with their decision to release the Snyder Cut. Many in the entertainment media complex have argued that caving in to fan pressure this way is bad, and that it sets a very dangerous precedent. But why? Why is listening to feedback and the demands of the actual paying consumers, in their words, so dangerous? Let's find out, for in this editorial, I will begin by exploring the resistance to the Snyder Cut by first looking into Warner attacking the fans for even wanting it in the first place, before going through the reasons given by the entertainment media complex for why releasing the Snyder Cut is bad, and finally, give my assessment on whether or not they may have a point. Before we get to the entertainment media complex, we have to address Warner themselves. Remember, we're getting the Snyder Cut because the corporate overlords at AT&T decided it might do for HBO Max what The Mandalorian did for Disney+. If it was up to Warner and their DC on film operation, you would, most likely, never have gotten it. Because as I covered in the previous video, releasing the Snyder Cut means exposing their own ineptitude and mismanagement of the DC brand. And on top of that, it could undermine their plans for the future. So really, Warner and DC consider you a bothersome troglodyte for even asking for the Snyder Cut in the first place, and they have no qualms about letting you know. This is why they saw fit to include an insult aimed at the fans in their Harley Quinn animated series. Here, they included two losers, their version of Beavis and Butthead, if you will, and they gave them t-shirt to let fans know exactly who they were meant to represent. What Warner and DC considers to be toxic fans, namely those asking for the Snyder Cut and those that have issues with The Last Jedi. See, that way they can take a dig at their own fanbase and score some brownie points with their peers in the industry while they're at it. Because The Last Jedi is seen as a golden calf of sorts. Worship by its altar and you will have passed the ideological purity test. So to anyone who ever championed the release of the Snyder Cut, know that neither Warner nor DC did ever appreciate your commitment, not in the slightest. On the contrary, they wanted you to be satisfied with the cut they gave you, and whatever they got coming your way next. Their implied message by including digs at the fanbase in this manner is as follows. Don't say what you want, don't express dissatisfaction with anything you are given. Just consume like a good pleb and shut up while you wait for the next product to consume. In my book, that's one elitist and condescending attitude, and they're not alone in having it. In disseminating that message, the studio has some very helpful mouthpieces in the entertainment media complex. Before we begin, I have to give props to John Trent of Bounding Into Comics fame for finding the articles I'm about to cover, so kudos. The entertainment media complex has spent a very long time gaslighting anyone wanting the Snyder Cut in the first place. More than that, many in the establishment have been quite adamant that no Snyder Cut ever existed, and many of those who admitted that it did exist were adamant that it would never be released under any circumstance whatsoever, so they weren't exactly appreciative when AT&T proved them wrong on all accounts. In case you're new here and should wonder about that, we have been speaking about the existence of the Snyder Cut since the moment Joss Whedon took over the project, and I've always maintained that while unlikely, an eventual Snyder Cut release was not off the table. But this is about those with sour grapes, not us. First up, Screen Rant decrees that signing off on the release of the Snyder Cut sets a very bad precedent indeed for Hollywood. The gist of their complaint is that the balance of power has shifted due to social media, and this apparently is bad. They struggle to articulate why though. They cite Sonic the Hedgehog, where fan backlash led to a character redesign, a decision which famously won the fanbase over, and the finished movie was a huge hit. Wait, how was that bad? Because if anything, that fan backlash is what saved Sonic. Well, Screen Rant can't argue against that, so they shift to Suicide Squad, because according to them, Warner attempted to change the film's tone and style to fit in with the popular trailers, and as a result created a jumbled mess. Except that's blatantly false. What actually happened was that Warner freaked out and started meddling with Suicide Squad due to the backlash against Batman v Superman, because Suicide Squad was cut from the same cloth as it. So then they did reshoots and re-edits, and to this end, they then had the company that makes movie trailers do a cut of the movie, and only part of that cut made it into theaters. But none of this has anything to do with what any fans demanded. This was a case of Warner overreacting to Batman v Superman, and in their overreaction, they messed up Suicide Squad, and they did it all on their own, and that's on them. Well, to be fair, I don't know if they messed up that bad compared to how it was before their meddling. I mean, David Ayer wrote the Suicide Squad script in just 6 weeks, and it needed plenty script doctoring to get it into shootable shape in the first place. So who knows if the studio really made it that much worse than it was going to be anyway. Moving on. The article then brings up what it considers other deeply problematic movements inspired by the #release the Snyder Cut movement, such as the calls to declare The Last Jedi non-canon, redo Game of Thrones Season 8, make a sequel to Alita, and more recently, release the Ayer cut of Suicide Squad. Wait, didn't this article just bemoan the music video editing of Suicide Squad just a few paragraphs up? Yes, it did, but I guess internal consistency has to give way for the ultimate end of calling fans toxic and misogynistic. Because that is what this boils down to. Even if fans are right, even if Sonic was massively improved by listening to the fans, even if the Snyder Cut probably will be better than the theatrical cut, which even this article in not so many words calls a Frankensteinian abomination, Screen Rant nonetheless expresses the opinion that fans are toxic and misogynistic, and in releasing the Snyder Cut, the studio has crossed the Rubicon. Even if AT&T's actual reason for doing this wasn't so much caving into fan pressure as it was creating a Mandalorian of their own for HBO Max. So, this article seems to be based on some faulty assumptions. And this is far from the worst, because we're just getting started. Collider also chimed in with the opinion that the entire #release the Snyder Cut movement was but a, quote, incredibly obnoxious fan uproar. Their view is that actually releasing the Snyder Cut is both mystifying and incredibly dangerous, because it sends the message that if you bitch and moan enough, the studio won't just cave, they might even agree with you. And Lord knows you can't agree with the fans, because the fans are bullies. Collider declares as much. In Collider's worldview, the fans bullied the studio, and they bullied everyone who suggested the Snyder Cut might actually be worse than the studio-approved Whedon Cut, which Collider appears to have suggested, and must have gotten some level of backlash for, and they evidently did not appreciate that one bit. The reasoning, according to Collider, is that if the Snyder Cut was so good, why would the executives order the reshoots in the first place? Collider is clearly of the opinion that the Snyder Cut must be worse than the theatrical cut, because the Warner executives always knew best. So it will be fun to see how that belief holds up with time. I think this quote right here best sums up the Collider article. For as long as the movement has raged, Warner has done the right thing and simply ignored them. The internet already gave them a voice when they shouldn't have had one. Yesterday, the studio gave them something they never expected but always craved: legitimacy. And now we're screwed. Fans, displeased by perceived slights, will now be insufferable. Not only will they demand alternate versions of movies more often, but their rhetoric will infect the release of this and any other DC property. If Warner thought that this would quiet them down, it won't. If anything, it will amplify their voices. The entitlement is already unbearable. Truer words were never spoken, but to be clear, the unbearable entitlement is from the elitist publication Collider proves itself to be with this article. It's honestly one of the worst examples of outright contempt for the movie-going audience and fan community I've ever seen. And it still gets worse. Many criticize us for being too political as of late, but really, we only ever discuss the topic when someone else have brought it up. Either by infusing their personal politics and ideological persuasion on screen, or in letting that determine who gets assigned to which position, or when someone judges the fan base through an ideopolitical lens, which is the case here. Vulture asks the question, what hath the Snyder Cut released? Yes, pray tell, what indeed? Let's see what Vulture has to say. Hold on to your hats, because this article begins with, in retrospect, it was inevitable. It's like Brexit, or Donald Trump's clinching of the presidency. Oh wow, the derangement syndrome is strong with this one. You might wonder, how the hell do you connect the dots between Brexit, Trump, and AT&T listening to fan demand and deciding the Snyder Cut might do for HBO Max what the Mandalorian did for Disney+. Well, Vulture found a way to connect those dots. Having established Brexit and Trump winning, the article continues. First, you hear that it happened. Then, even if you wanted it to happen, you're shocked. These people aren't supposed to be calling the shots. They're déclassé outsiders, drunk on atavistic rage and viciously abusive toward their foes. Such people are destined to be at the fringe, not the hub of power. And yet, when you stop mumbling your disbelief, you're stuck with the reality that it happened, that an ancient seal has been broken, and you start to see all the forces that broke it. Soon, you're kicking yourself for not seeing this certainty sooner. Jesus, you think. It really happened. They really released the Snyder Cut. According to Vulture, releasing the Snyder Cut is bad, okay? It's really bad. Like, really, really bad. So you shouldn't release the Snyder Cut, which Vulture describes as, and I quote, something dangerous that has been let loose on the world. Not the cut itself, but the idea of it, and what is described as a multi-billion-dollar corporation's concession to its worst online critics. First of all, that's not true. How many times do I have to say this? AT&T are using the Snyder Cut as a means to the end of pushing HBO Max, just as Disney did with The Mandalorian on Disney+, and CBS did with Star Trek Discovery and later Picard on CBS All Access. I don't get why so many established publications find this so difficult to understand. Only difference is that the Snyder Cut is something that fans actually wanted in advance. The sticking point though, as usual, is the fans. Vulture has this theory, which they treat as absolute fact, that the fans clamoring for the Snyder Cut, in not so many words, are all a bunch of Trump supporters, with everything that, according to Vulture, entails. Vulture reached that conclusion by assuming that since Marvel are so inclusive, diverse, and overall virtuous, then all the nasty people who object to that rally behind the Snyder Cut. And they just got a win. That's bad, because Vulture summarizes it as follows. Just imagine how emboldened and vindicated that sort of troll will now feel in their efforts to, say, reduce the flow of queer, non-white or female characters in their favorite franchises. I feel this, in a nutshell, summarizes the backlash there has been against the decision to release the Snyder Cut. Even most of the establishment media concedes that Warner kind of screwed up, and the Snyder Cut will probably be a huge step up from the theatrical cut. Only a sparse few, led by Collider, actually believe the studio was right all along and that the Snyder Cut will turn out worse than the present cut. And Collider sure get a lot of interviews, even if hardly anyone watches them. However, the entirety of the entertainment media complex seem to be in lockstep in the opinion that fans are toxic, horrible people for wanting the Snyder Cut in the first place. And giving them that sets a precedent that is dangerous, even if they're not able to cite a single good case study to back that assertion up. But in their book, fans are toxic and mustn't be catered to. In my view, fans by and large aren't toxic. But this kind of thinking is. The decision to release the Snyder Cut has exposed the true levels of disdain and contempt many within the industry and surrounding media complex feel towards the fans, or rather, the consumers who are the most keen to buy ever more product. I'm not saying audiences should always be listened to. Case in point, whichever audiences the powers that be tested I Am Legend on were too stupid to get the significance of the movie's original ending and title. So they changed it to something more conventional but gave up the story in the process. There, the studio should have stuck to their guns and not listened to what the test screen audiences told them. In the case of Sonic though, listening is what saved that movie, and therefore its studio from certain financial disaster. In either event, neither the studios nor the entertainment media complex should think of their audience, their consumers, as enemies that need talking down to. Yet they do, and that is what is truly problematic. Until that changes, they'll keep making boneheaded decisions and reveal just how out of touch they truly are. And that won't work out well for them in the end. I salute AT&T for stepping in and doing the right thing, just as I saluted the makers of Sonic the Hedgehog and distributor Paramount for doing the right thing there. In so doing, they pleased their audience, their paying consumers, and in the process, they increased the bottom line and financial gains for their investors. The rest of the industry should take note. Let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comments.